Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be here in person, isn't it? Nice for us all to be here together, not remotely, but to be here as a group. I'm delighted to be here at this Launchpad event this afternoon. My name is Dr. Christopher Kettle, and I lead the Science Domain in Forest Genetic Resources and Restoration at Biodiversity International. This Launchpad is really to address the delivery of diversity and seed systems to address the bond challenges and the phenomenal pledges that have been made to deliver restoration of degraded lands. This morning there was a paper released, a news article released in Nature, How to Plant 1 Trillion Trees. Just to put that in some context, we have about 3.7 trillion trees on our planet. So we're talking about planting 1/3 of the trees on our planet. That's about 130 trees per person on the planet. So this is a phenomenal task. And it's not just any tree, it's in the right trees with the right diversity that are going to survive and deliver resilient restoration. So I'm delighted to have here in the room with me a group of colleagues who are all working on these issues and are trying to address this both globally and at the level of Africa as well. I'm going to introduce the panel very quickly. We're going to have 3 presentations from Barbara Vincenti at the end there, who is a senior scientist from Biodiversity International, and then Marius Iku, who leads the forest genetic research work in biodiversity in Cameroon, and then Marlena Ardiani, who's a gender specialist from Biodiversity International, all working from very interdisciplinary perspectives on restoration. We also have Dr. Danny Ofe, who's the director of the Forest Research Institute of Ghana and the head of the Ministry of Forest and Wildlife from Cameroon as well, Dr. Aseni Ngome. And I'm delighted to have as panelists to contribute to this session. So, as I said, this is the list of the panelists here. We're going to start with a presentation from Marius Eku from our Cameroonian office, and then we'll go on to Barbara and Marlena. We'll have a panel discussion followed by an open discussion with the audience, and we should wrap up in around 45 to an hour. We want to try and have an open discussion with the audience as well. Okay. I'd like to bring first Marius Eku.
Okay, thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Launchpad. So, my name is Marius Ekwe. I'm working for Biodiversity International, and I'm based in our office in Yaoundé, Cameroon. So, I will talk to you today about our Tree for Seed initiatives. When I look at the website of the African Forest Restoration Initiative this morning, we discovered that 26 countries so far has pledged 96 million hectares of land to restore. When I was living in Yaoundé 3 days ago, it was at 86%. So within 3 days, we jumped by, I think, 10%. So I'm pretty sure by the end of next month, we will probably have more than what the initiative is pledged to, probably more than 100 million hectares to restore. And I went through the website to see the priority intervention mentioned by the countries. And then you see here some keywords that relate to why they want to restore and also how to do it. And we see like reforestation, agroforestry, people want to generate income. They mention biodiversity protection, community forests, and all of those activities are going to require a lot of seeds. In fact, a lot. And Chris just mentioned these papers that came out from Nature yesterday. And then I put below, I quote one phrase is saying that many restoration projects fail because they choose the wrong trees, use a few species, or are not managed for the long term. So this is really a very big challenge ahead of us, and we need to do it in a way that we will have a success in the future. Biodiversity has conducted a global survey of 139 restoration projects worldwide, including 39 from Africa, implemented in different places in Africa. And we discovered also that the lack of attention to the quantity and the quality of seeds are having a major impact on restoration. And in fact, 47% of the projects have reported delay in restoration because they could not find the good quality material to plant. Also, it contributes to the increasing the cost of restoration as planned initially. And most importantly also, they have some time to restore the same site again. So if we really want to restore these 100 million hectares by 2030, so only 11 years away, we need to do it in the right way so we don't have to repeat those same mistakes. And this is why the Tree for Seed initiative is very important. So to move from those degraded land to have a very resilient system, we need really the right trees, seeds. And the good thing is we know how to conserve tree genetic diversity in a different landscape. Most of trees have recalcitrant seeds and we cannot keep them in a gene bank like for some crops. So we need to conserve them in the field in a very dynamic gene conservation unit. So we need really to identify those diversity and also be able to deliver it to the users to attain different objectives, and to ensure that the material that we are planted or delivering to them through natural regeneration are really locally adapted. And how the Tree for Seed initiative is implemented, we have 3 different steps. The first one is about identifying the diversity and trying to safeguard it, what we call a gene conservation unit for priority species. And it's not something new. It has been done for almost 100 species in Europe by the European Forest Genetic Resource Network. And we really need to work within network because tree doesn't have borders. So biodiversity has initiated what we call the 4-gene networks. So in Asia, in Africa, and also in Latin America. And we are working with our partners to identify those diversity gene conservation units and how to manage them. So I will just illustrate very briefly here with one African timber species, native species used a lot in the Sahel. It's called African Mahogany, Kaya senegalensis. And the species is facing a threat of illegal logging and overexploitation. It's also important for Fulani herders, so they are pruning the trees to feed their cattle, and also the bark are also harvested for medicine, so it's a multi-purpose species. And of course, there are a lot of plantations across the Sahelian area, and most of them are really not performing well because of probably the lack of attention to the quality of material planted. So biodiversity, we have conducted suitability and threat mapping to identify the different area good for planting the species for now and for the future. Also, we did some genetic diversity study, and we came out with some priority population for conservation, and those are areas that have to be managed to collect material to supply for restoration in the future. I mentioned the network, so the Sub-Saharan African Forest Genetic Resource Network, SAFORGEN, that I'm coordinating now. Also, we are working with FAO, and if you look at the first state of the World Forestry, the first state of the World Forest Genetic Report published by FAO in 2014, 31 African countries has contributed national reports. And together they identify 3,800 native species useful for different purposes. And about 1,000 of those species are threatened. So within Saforgen and with a collaboration with the genetic resource team at FAO, we established a working group to see how to deal with, to prioritize again further down those species and develop the conservation unit. The second step, when we identify the 3 species, we need to be able to deliver it to the people. So Biodiversity is working on a tool we call Diversity for Restoration tool, and it's already implemented in Colombia and Peru. In Colombia for dry forests, and also in Peru for humid forests. And this tool, we wanted to scale it in other countries in Africa and Latin America. So the seed supply system, part of this work is involved also trying to evaluate the seed system in each country. And it has been done already for 7 countries in Latin America. And we look at things like what are the seed harvesting and production system, what is the market access and demand, supply and demand side, are there some selection work done, and what are the innovation, what is the enabling environment, and most importantly, is there any kind of a quality control of those seed and other forest reproductive material? And the conclusion is none of those countries are really, the people involved in those work are not looking really well at the diversity side. So the same work needs to be conducted in Africa. But if you see, they mention also a lot of native species. And like in Colombia, more than 5,000 native species, but only 10 of them are found in provenance real. And when we come to breeding again, it decreases. So we have a lot of work to do. And the diversity of for restoration tool, as I said, is just a tool to help you once you have the site you wanted to restore. You have to tell the program how many species you want to use in your restoration work, define the objective of your restoration, and then the tool will propose to you some list of species with some suitability map, and also taking into account current and future climate change. It will also provide to you the list of nursery and place where you can find seeds and material for those priority species that you decided to use for your restoration. And also, you can have also information about some propagation protocol for those species. So once we have identified the gene conservation unit, and then the tool, we develop the tool to help a practitioner to select the right species. We need now to find a way to scale the delivery of those material to the farm and for different purposes. So, and this is a tool we also developing, we are now developing in Peru, Ethiopia, and Malaysia, and this can be extended to any AFR countries. And it's involved some capacity building knowledge. In fact, we have conducted a small survey about to look at curricula at different forest degree in sub-Saharan Africa. And what we discover is that those are not issues that are really taught at the university. So the forest practitioners we have in the field, they don't know how to integrate those genetic diversity components in the day-to-day management. They have the guideline to collect seeds, but usually they can go to the forest and only collect material from only one species, only one trees, and then propagate those seeds all over the country. So we are developing those tools, and that can be really taught to the people very easily, even if some practitioners, so they can understand how to take them into account. The second thing is also we want to use also the power of technology, like a mobile apps technology, to document the movements of seed and forest reproductive material. So it will be from the seed tree where seeds are collected, documented, the nursery where it's multiplied, and down to the restoration site. So we should be able, for any area restored, to track down the individual trees or seeds or material planted back to the mother tree. And we believe such technology is very innovative. If you look across sub-Saharan Africa now, the use of mobile phone is very widespread. And this is probably also a very good way to get youth interested into restoration activity and to develop some business around those issues. So to summarize, our Tree for Seed initiatives is all about safeguarding the diversity of tree species. It's also about providing tools and building capacity to deliver this diversity according to different objectives. And also, it's also about providing or using a new technology to supply those locally adapted material to help us to deliver the Sustainable Development Goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marius, for that great introduction to the Trees for Seeds initiative. I think it highlights that this is a very interdisciplinary issue that needs to have a multidisciplinary team to work with as well. So this is why it's not just about working with geneticists, but it's about working with gender specialists, nutritional specialists, and people who can deal with that spatial information as well. Next up, I would like to invite Barbara Vincenti to talk about how we're integrating within the Trees for Seeds initiative the use of different approaches to address the food security issues as nutritional sensitive restoration.
Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Do you know what is portrayed in this picture on the first slide? How many do know? Few people. So these are baobab leaves in a market. Baobab is a very important part of the diet for 90% of the households across most of the countries in the Sahelian and Sudanian belt. So I will give you a snapshot of our work on what we call nutrition sensitive restoration. This is just a small scale type of work that we would like to bring up to scale through other collaborations beyond those that we have so successfully established already on the ground. So some ideas are exploratory, some ideas have much more potential in terms of immediate explorations. So we are working in Burkina Faso, which is a country which has lost a lot of its forest cover in the last 30, 40 years. You can see the green has almost disappeared. The forest cover is about 20%. It's a savanna primarily, and there's also a 17% cover of agroforestry systems. 70% of the population lives in rural areas, and there's a strong pressure on the land, which is also receiving, especially in the south, waves of migrations from the Sahel, which is becoming drier. So the loss of forest land is huge, and per year it's equals 0.5%, and mainly because croplands are expanding and people clear the trees to cultivate, but also grazing is a major pressure, and also fire. In terms of mapping the potential for restoration, Burkina Faso is well embedded in this umbrella initiative, the Great Green Wall. So under the leadership of FAO, the mapping of areas with high potential for restorations have been already identified. And there are no official pledges put forward by the country, but we are talking about 2 million hectares of land, degraded land that requires restoration. As you can see from these figures provided also by FAO, by the last report on the state of forest, the whole Sahel belt, in terms of income, depends hugely on the contribution of non-wood forest products. And also Burkina, the second one on the left, has about 30% of the households which are heavily relying for income on non-wood forest products. So non-wood forest product species are hugely important. Also in terms of food security and nutrition, and in the last 5 years we have seen a wealth of publications which have been highlighting the role of tree species in diets. So maybe there's no need to insist, but it's just that there's no need to create maybe additional awareness. The awareness is there. Now we need to see how this can be operationalized. In terms of Burkina Faso, there are numbers of studies which are showing the perception of the local populations in terms of what species contribute mostly to the diet. And you see those with the red arrows are tree species. So half of the species flagged as priorities for a group of farmers in eastern Burkina Faso are trees and are considered of high value and high importance. So our work in Burkina is relying fundamentally on three very strong local partners. We have association with Tipalga, of which you might know a lot by now because they have got a lot of visibilities in this conference. So it's a local association which is working closely with farmers at individual farm household level. We are working with the National Tree Seed Center, which has the potential to feed in terms of seed supply large-scale projects. And we are also working with IRSAT, which is a research institute with a unit dealing with food technologies for the nutritional analysis. And we have also partnership with POCO in Vienna. So our questions driving our research were, what are the trajectories of these dryland forest landscapes in Burkina, where we see different agents of change, planting trees. We see small-scale restoration activities, but we see also other farmers planting trees for other purposes other than restoration. So what is this diversity configuration of these landscapes? Our current restoration practice is taking into account a diverse set of indigenous species. And are there ways to promote the inclusion of important indigenous native species which have a role in the diet in these restoration efforts? And also, what are the seed sources used by farmers? And sometimes we see farmer-assisted natural regeneration. Sometimes we see spontaneous regrowth of indigenous species if you prevent the area from grazing. But what is the current supply of food tree species in the system? And also, is there a way to characterize forest reproductive material not just in terms of genetic quality, but also in terms of nutritional properties? So we selected about 100 farmers who are followed by Tipalga across about 30 sites in the central plateau of Burkina Faso. And so Tipalga is promoting the establishment of fences around small plots and selecting farmers based on their motivation, their capacity to follow up with the activities in which they are committing, and also with sufficient land to be able to set aside a piece of it for restoration. And we see some farmers already from the first year having a lot of benefits from this kind of approach because they already can sell the forage, which is growing abundantly as soon as you fence an area off. And there's a lot of innovation going on also in these plots in terms of different experiments to favor the growth of seedlings. You see a drip system, which is taken from, is using equipment from an hospital to drip irrigate the seedlings of valuable species. So these are kind of small labs of also of innovation. And we took also some other farmers in the nearby areas who are exposed to this example, but they are not directly fencing and working with Tipalga, and other farmers further away who are not exposed to this kind of innovative activities going on in these plots. And we try to understand what are the planting strategies and what is happening in the landscape. So we see three main types of planting strategies. We see a first group on the left of farmers who are planting very few trees and mostly exotics. We see farmers on the right who are planting a higher number of species and primarily indigenous species. And we see an intermediate group planting a high diversity of species, mixing indigenous and exotics. And if we look at the factors that are conditioning the choices, in terms of number of tree species, these are preliminary results that we would like to further refine, but these are emerging points. The number of tree species planted is highly constrained by what is available in terms of seed supply. The number of tree individuals planted depends on the labor available in the household and also the technical capacity within the household to manage a large number of trees and manage the plot. And the proportion of exotic species is really depending on whether we have fencing or not. So if we compare the plots with fences and those without fences, we see that if we want, there's a lot of information behind this table, but if we want to point the attention to the species with high importance in terms of nutrition, which are the ones in red, you see the gray bar corresponding to fence plots. They have a much higher proportion of these species. Also thanks to spontaneous regeneration within the plots, not just exclusively the planting. In terms of sources of seed, you see the three darker sections are flagging local sources, farmers' fields, very small local nurseries run at a very small scale, and some plantations and woodlands and fallow land in the surrounding. And only to a very small extent, the supply is provided by NGOs, the National Tree Seed Center, and also distant nurseries. And these sources are likely to be maybe better certified, better characterized in terms of properties, but they correspond to a very small amount of what is planted. So an idea we have about promoting the use of food tree species is to use the tool that Marius has shown, enriching this catalog, developing a module for the country of Burkina, and enriching this module with additional information. And this could be also promoted by the National Tree Seed Center, which is supplying other kinds of projects of a much larger scale, and they are getting engaged more and more also with the restoring mining sites. So they might also inform practitioners who are coming from outside about what is available and what could be used to restore different kinds of sites. And we would like to feed the tool with information about food tree species. We have already mapped the distribution of about 16 very important top priority species in Burkina Faso. So we have with maps of distribution, we have maps about future expected distribution based on threats. And we would like to feed the tool with information about this modeling, nutritional data, and also genetic data, which is something that we do more on a regular basis, characterize the different sources also in terms of properties associated with the genetic origin. And a final piece of work I wanted to highlight, which is more exploratory, is focused on a model species, Parkia biglobosa, which is hugely important for the diet of 400 million people. It has a huge distribution range, and it's mainly used to produce a sauce, which is a condiment found in most of the dishes in West Africa. So what we have just completed is a full characterization of the genetic diversity of the species, which shows already a huge diversity in terms of morphology, especially the pods, which contain the important part, edible part. They have a huge variation, and we have seen that in provenance trials established by the National Tree Seed Center. And now we would like to add a characterization of the different populations of trees in terms of nutritional values. So we want to couple the genetic information and the nutritional information with information about the environments to try to disentangle the elements that are responsible for the variation that we find. So we are going to see whether there's significant variation across different origins and also to what it is attributable. So some lessons learned to quickly summarize. So this small-scale household-driven restoration seems to be quite effective in terms of providing multiple services to the farmers who are directly involved. They choose the species of interest, and they also have a way to acquire more security in terms of tenure once they put the fences around. So the amount of investment and the time put into making these plots really very important is considerable compared to other restoration efforts that involve maybe entire communities. And fence plots tend to include more indigenous food species compared to other planting efforts in the same landscapes. So the choices are largely affected by what planting material is available and also by the fencing in terms of species composition. The seed supply is predominantly local, so there's important reflections to be made in terms of how to raise the capacity at the local level to create capacity to use best practices for seed collection. And the farmers who are working with Tipalga, they receive training from the National Tree Seed Center, so they are quite informed, but there's a need for a broader dissemination of what are the best practices for producing planting material. And also, what we discovered, the viability in terms of nurseries, the viability of producing seedlings of food and medicinal species may be less than other exotics because they are demanded by farmers in smaller numbers. So there's also a business model to be developed for these small-scale nurseries. And in terms of something I didn't show, in terms of also social benefits, these fence plots offer huge opportunities also to women groups to gain access and access rights and possibility to manage pieces of land which are maybe marginal, but for them could be a significant improvement in their condition. And they tend to also privilege food and medicinal species. So there's huge opportunities also in terms of social equity through this approach, which has been promoted by Dipalga and is also increasingly engaging women's group. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Barbara. Next up, we have Marlene Elias, who's going to be talking to us about gender-sensitive restoration and approaches to that.
Thanks, Chris. So it's still in the optic of developing resilient systems through restoration. I'm going to be speaking about how the Trees for Seeds approach is not only about trees, it's also, of course, about people. So yesterday, one of the speakers in the opening plenary said something that I thought was quite interesting. He said it was hard to remember the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and to have them all in our head, but that the essence of those goals is two things essentially. They're about improved human welfare and about a healthier planet. So Kate Raworth, who's an economist and who spent 10 years working at Oxfam, proposed a framework that I think is quite valuable for thinking about what kind of economy we need to achieve this. And she drew upon the work of Johan Rockström and colleagues from the Stockholm Resilience Center, and that's what's displayed here, and their notion of planetary boundaries. And what they developed as a concept essentially is that there is an environmental ceiling with 9 boundaries that the planet can surpass if humanity wants to maintain a safe space, a space that's hospitable to our species. And we can see those there. And the green space in the middle of that diagram is that safe space that we want to be maintaining. And you can see that even in 2009, when they tried to calculate how we were doing on those planetary boundaries, we were already overshooting on 3 of those boundaries. But Raworth found that there was something missing, something more that she wanted to add to this diagram. To this concept, there was a layer missing to the story. So she added the notion of a social foundation that we can't fall below if we want to avoid human deprivation. And so her diagram looks more like a donut here. And what she takes as the basic necessities that all humans should have rights to have are what is listed on the inside of the circle there. And she says essentially we should have basic human rights to access all of these goods in order to avoid a life of deprivation. And when all humans are able to operate within that environmental ceiling and above that social foundation, she says we're operating not only in a safe but also in a just space for humanity. So her framework is very useful for putting together the welfare, human welfare, and the environmental components that are at the center of the SDGs together. And when we look at, I think it's the wrong, sorry. So when we look at those basic necessities that are listed inside of that social foundation circle, and also at the environmental ceiling and of the planetary boundaries, we can see that restoration really offers a very strong potential to move us towards that safe and just space for humanity. But it really depends on the kind of approaches that we espouse. So not all restoration approaches will help us get there. And the idea of bringing in more diversity and of doing restoration in a way that is socially inclusive and gender responsive can help us achieve more of those goals. So the Trees for Seeds initiative is trying to an approach that's trying to help us navigate in that space and to achieve many of those objectives. So it focuses on the environmental but also on the social dimensions of resilient systems. and tries to do that in a way that is, of course, that holds meaning for local communities. So we try to take a gender-responsive approach, and what that means essentially is recognizing that rural communities are diversified based on gender, age, and number of other factors, residence status, and so on, that their members have different experiences, unequal opportunities, so women and men may have different access to resources, they play different role in their household livelihood strategies, they have different knowledge of the environment, and that shapes their priorities for restoration. And for the type of biodiversity they might want to see on restored lands or the density of that biodiversity. So knowing this, gender-responsive restoration is attentive to at least 3 core elements. And we'll look at those very quickly because I know we are quite short on time actually. But a very critical issue in restoration is being able to safeguard the rights and the access of communities to the lands and the resources that they use, and to which they may not have any formal titles. And on that point, a number of speakers yesterday stressed the fact that access and claims to land and to trees may be very different and that both have to be considered when we're talking about restoration. And of course, because restoration is ultimately about changing the way that land is used and ultimately changing the value of the land and of those resources, these kinds of changes can lead to shifts in the rights of people who use those resources and who may not have formal titles to them. So women, for example, who collect non-timber forest products in areas that might become restored can actually lose access to those lands. And those are the kinds of risks that we really want to be managing carefully in a gender-responsive restoration initiative. And what's exciting is that there are several examples, as Barbara mentioned, one of them, where restoration can actually be used as a vehicle to strengthen the rights of marginalized groups. And so it can be used as a point to actually move us towards more social equity and gender equality and towards that space that we want to be operating in. So the second element that's part of a gender-responsive restoration strategy is really facilitating the equal voice and influence of women and men at all levels in important decisions related to restoration. So voice, you can see, is its own objective here in the framework. This voice is essentially what would allow communities, women and men, to define their own restoration objectives and the ways, the approaches they want to see implemented in order to get there. So their ability to engage in the process, restoration process, on their own terms. And different measures will be needed to facilitate that voice to women and to men because they have different capacities for restoration, different access to different resources, and they're also subject to different norms that make it easier or harder for them to participate in decision making. So this voice is extremely important in and of itself because it's essentially about self-determination, but it's also very important because it can translate into more substantive equality in the distribution of costs and benefits from restoration. So some of those benefits, as we said, are listed here. There are a number of others as well that are not there that you can get out of the restoration process and experience. So monetary benefits, of course, have been shown to be extremely important to incentivize people to participate in restoration, and the lack of direct benefits to local populations has been shown as obviously a factor that disincentivizes them from participating in restoration. And there are inequalities, we know, in how benefits are shared within communities and also on how costs to restoring lands are shared. So costs with respect to labor, or it could be other indirect, non-monetary, so in-kind or monetary contributions. And when there's equity in how those benefits and those costs are distributed, we get closer to that safe and just operating space for humanity, and we also are able to motivate, incentivize a much larger number of people to participate in restoration. So just to conclude then, this is a slide that shows some of the risks related to ignoring gender issues in restoration, and also some of the elements of what a gender-responsive restoration approach should involve. And we really are guided by these elements in our Trees for Seeds initiative. So All of this to try to move us towards that safe and just operating space for humanity. So we hope you'll join us in that, taking up that tall challenge. Because we need partnership and we need a lot of heads thinking in different ways to come up with really innovative and sustainable solutions.
Thank you, Marlena, for really bringing very well that and social inclusiveness and the social economic context of why diversity is so critical for making sure that the restoration is going to be resilient. I'd like to open up the panel discussion now and really introduce our other two panelists here. I'll ask Dr. Ofori to introduce himself again, and then first of all I'd like you to we know that all of the countries involved in Africa 100 are making some significant pledges. So could you just remind us what those pledges are and how Ghana are preparing to deliver on those pledges?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, I'm Daniel Ofori, Director of Forestry Research Institute of Ghana. Well, let me give some historical background before I come to the pledge. Sure. Ghana, as a country, at the turn of 20th century, had about 8.2 million hectares of forest land. Currently, it has degraded to 1.6 million hectares. And if you look at the rate of degradation, it's 2% per year. And there are a lot of factors that are involved. If you look at how much we are trying to restore, we're planting about 13,000 hectares a year. But the 2% degradation amounts to about 135,000 hectares in a year. And the factors include agricultural expansion, which is about 50%, logging about 35%, urbanization, mining, and wildfires account for about 15%. So Ghana as a country has a big challenge and wants to restore the land. So that's why Ghana committed to restore 2 million hectares of land through the AFR 100 committed that. So this was launched in 2016 in Ghana. And Ghana has aligned these targets into its programs, several programs that Ghana is undertaking, and has also infused this in the National Forest Plantation Strategy. And if you look at the National Forest Plantation Strategy, Ghana has over 3 million hectares for plantations. And the strategy has come out that it's going to plant, doing forest plantations, 625,000 hectares. And then for enrichment planting, 100,000 hectares. And then trees on farm, 3.75 million hectares. So Ghana has come out of a lot of programs that is implementing. One of them is the Forest Investment Program, where Ghana is trying to restore degraded sites, especially in the cocoa landscape. Because now if you go into the cocoa landscape, there are little trees, number of trees in the landscape. And that also lessens the lifespan of the cocoa. And then if the cocoa dies, the land is left bare. So this forest investment program is trying to diversify the agricultural landscape. I also mentioned mining. There are a whole lot of illegal mining in the country that is degrading the land. So the government has placed a ban on illegal mining and now has set up interministerial committee that is looking at the whole sector and that will be giving permits for mining. The country also, revenue for timber, part of it is being used for establishment of forest plantations. There are also other programs that the country, there are a lot of other programs like Form Ghana has gotten $24 million grant from African Development Bank for tree plantation. And then if you look at other things like evergreen agriculture, Savannah Accelerated Program, Regreening Africa, Climate Investment Plan, and so in the country, all targeting the restoration. Currently, we have a total area of 151,228,000 hectares restored. And this includes plantations, that is 21.7 thousand hectares, trees on farm, 119,000 hectares, and then enrichment planting, 10,000 hectares. So these are what the country is doing to meet this target. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to also ask Mr. Ancien Ngong to also, I think he's going to answer in French, but if that's right, and then I think Marlena or Marius is going to translate.
Merci Chris de m'avoir invité à cette session. Effectivement, je m'appelle Ngomi Nanissé. Je suis du ministère des Forêts et de la Faune au Cameroun, en charge des questions de reboisement, de régénération forestière. Je suis en même temps point focal national de l'AFR 100. Et donc, merci pour la question que vous me posez et qui me donne l'occasion effectivement de vous entretenir un tout petit peu sur ce qui est fait en termes de progrès par rapport à la restauration des paysages. Je voulais très rapidement peut-être laisser.
Okay, so Monsieur Ngomé reintroduced himself and his functions, and in addition to what Chris presented earlier, he's also the focal point, national focal point for AFR 100. And thanks Chris for the question.
Voilà, l'engagement politique du Cameroun est clair parce que au niveau de l'AFR 100, effectivement, le pays s'est engagé à restaurer 12 millions d'hectares.
So Cameroon has committed to restoring 12 million hectares of land.
Et en 2015, lors de la conférence de Paris sur le climat, le Cameroun s'est engagé à réduire de 32% ses émissions de gaz à effet de serre. 32%.
So in 2015, during the with the Paris Agreement, Cameroon committed to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 32%.
D'accord. Le Cameroun a une particularité parce que c'est le pays qui réunit pratiquement tous les écosystèmes d'Afrique. Et donc, la biodiversité est très large, elle est très diversifiée, très riche. C'est un atout, mais c'est en même temps que ça pose beaucoup de défis.
So Cameroon has a particularity. It has all of the ecosystems that are found in Africa and a lot of biodiversity, which is obviously a richness, but also poses certain challenges.
D'accord. Le domaine forestier, nous avons fait le cadastre forestier. On a divisé le domaine forestier en deux. Il y a le domaine forestier non permanent et le domaine forestier permanent qui est donc sous aménagement.
Okay, so there is the permanent forest domain and the non-permanent forest domain. And the permanent forest domain is under management,
Oui, sous aménagement, qui est aménagé. Voilà.
Is a managed area.
Voilà, je vais beaucoup insister sur ce domaine forestier permanent qui est aménagé.
So he's going to be referring now to this domain, the permanent forest domain, which
Ce
is
domaine
managed.
représente environ 15 millions d'hectares.
About 15 million hectares.
Voilà, et dans le cadre de cet aménagement, effectivement, il y a des parties de la forêt qui sont laissées au repos pour se régénérer.
Okay, so there are areas within that zone that are left to regenerate, untouched.
Et donc, actuellement, sur les 15 millions, il y a environ 1,5 million hectares de forêts qui sont laissées au repos pour la régénération naturelle. Et donc, c'est un effort dans le cadre de la restauration des paysages.
Okay, so that's about 1,500,000 hectares that is left in that state for natural regeneration.
Et aussi dans le cadre de la politique de décentralisation de l'État, l'État a transféré 400 000 hectares de forêt aux communes. 400 000 hectares de forêt aux communes.
Okay, so as part of the decentralization policy of the state has transferred 400,000 hectares of forest to communities.
Voilà, donc actuellement, l'État a mis à la disposition des acteurs privés, dont des communes, des associations, pratiquement 5 milliards de francs CFA pour faire du reboisement.
Okay, so approximately 5 million francs CFA have been put at the disposition of the private sector, including communities, to engage in reforesting.
Voilà, et cela permet de réaliser actuellement environ 30 000 hectares de forêts plantées.
Okay, so
30 000 hectares.
enabling them to achieve about 30,000 hectares of planted forest.
Alors, il y a beaucoup de défis, peut-être je ne vais pas les relever tous ici, mais on a un vrai problème, c'est que la filière semencière, qui est à la base des programmes de reboisement, n'est pas encore suffisamment structurée.
Okay, so one of the big challenges, there are many, but he won't mention them all, but one of the biggest challenges is that the supply chain that is at the base of this reforesting effort is not well structured.
Voilà, donc actuellement, nous avons un programme qui nous permet de réaliser environ 2000 hectares de reboisement chaque année. Ce n'est pas suffisant quand on regarde le niveau de dégradation, seulement 2000 hectares chaque année.
So at the moment, there's a program that enables the reforestation of 2,000 hectares per year, which is not sufficient given the current needs.
Alors, heureusement, le gouvernement a pris en main cette question. Nous sommes en train de d'élaborer un nouveau programme qui va nous permettre donc de passer de 2000 hectares à 20 000 hectares par an.
Okay, so the government has taken this matter into its hands and is developing a new program that's going to enable them to move from 2,000 hectares to 20,000 hectares par année,
Oui, par an,
per year
20 000
of
20 000 hectares
reforesting.
par an. Et cela va poser un défi en termes de financement. Il va falloir trouver des financements. Et pour cela, il faut d'abord analyser, n'est-ce pas, le rapport coût-bénéfice.
So they're going to need financing to do that, and they're going to be doing a cost-benefit analysis to.
Comme je l'ai dit, il faut maîtriser la question semencière, donc il faut maîtriser l'offre et la demande en matière de semences.
And understanding supply and demand in terms of seed
Il
supplies.
faut s'assurer également de l'implication du privé dans ce processus.
And ensuring the implication of private sector actors in that
Voilà, donc,
process.
actuellement, nous avons une agence qui est liée au ministère, donc qui gère un peu la question de semences. C'est elle qui est en charge de la production des semences. Et il y en a environ 2 millions de semences plants. C'est-à-dire on a besoin d'environ 2 millions de semences pour produire les plants, pour effectivement mettre en place le programme de 2000 hectares auquel j'ai fait allusion tout à l'heure.
Okay, so they have an agency linked to the ministry that is in charge of producing seed and seedlings.
Yeah.
And so they have, at the moment, they use 2 million
Oui, 2 millions.
seeds
Oui.
to produce into seedlings to be
Yeah.
distributed as part of this program? Is that
Exactement,
correct?
exactement. Et le véritable problème, en réalité, c'est qu'il n'y a pas suffisamment d'infrastructures pour le faire, pour avoir des semences de qualité, donc des semences certifiées. Et puis, l'essentiel des semences proviennent de la forêt, mais il y a une bonne partie également qui est constituée d'espèces exotiques, telles que l'eucalyptus et le teck, pour la partie de savane humide et pour la partie du nord.
Okay, so there's a problem is the lack of infrastructure to be able to deliver quality seed certified, and so they're producing some indigenous seed, but also exotics, eucalyptus for the part of the savanna, the humid savanna, and teak.
Et la partie
Teak, sorry,
sahélienne, oui, dans la partie sahélienne.
for the
Et
Sahelian
puis on utilise
region.
les espèces locales, les espèces indigènes pour le reboisement dans la partie sud du pays, qui est dans la zone forestière.
Okay, and local species for reforesting in the southern part of the country in
Voilà. C'est
forest
important
zone.
également, je vais peut-être chuter par là, parler également du rôle du genre, l'aspect genre. Parce que j'ai vu des exemples au Bénin où on a spécialisé les femmes dans la production des semences et ça marche très bien pour accompagner les programmes de reboisement. Donc nous pensons que cette expérience, nous pouvons la transférer au niveau de Cameroun pour essayer de l'expérimenter également.
So they've observed that in Benin, women have been very qualified in producing seedlings, and it's an experience that they would like to reproduce or try to reproduce now in Cameroon, replicate.
Et je voudrais peut-être lancer un appel, je vais chuter par là, je vais conclure pour dire, j'espère que je vais obtenir en partant d'ici peut-être l'accord de principe d'une structure comme Bioversity, qui est spécialisée vraiment sur les questions de semences, de dire que voilà, votre structure va accompagner le Cameroun dans le cadre de la mise en œuvre du programme national de développement des plantations pour qu'on puisse faire 20 000 hectares chaque année. Alors le défi est très grand. On a besoin effectivement de l'appui des structures comme l'ICRAF, comme Biodiversité et bien d'autres pour nous accompagner dans ce processus. Si c'est OK, je vais mettre ça dans mon rapport.
Okay, so he's asked for the granting of an MOU with Biodiversity, ICRAF, and other organizations that are able to accompany Cameroon in its national program for reforesting 20,000 hectares per year. So organizations that have the capacity to accompany.
Il y a une banque de semences qu'on est en train de mettre en place en Balmayo, juste à côté de Yaoundé. On a déjà conçu le bâtiment, mais il faut l'équiper en matériel, mais puis faire également un laboratoire pour travailler effectivement sur la question de technologie des semences.
So there's a seed bank that they've put into place near Yaoundé, but they still need more materials and a lab to be able to fully operationalize it.
Je chute par là. Le chef de gouvernement vient de mettre en place un comité interministériel sur instruction du chef de l'État pour maîtriser la filière semences. Et je suis membre de ce comité, heureusement. Et je suis en charge également de l'élaboration du programme de développement des plantations forestières. Merci.
Merci. En fait, tu as fait toute la question. Maintenant, ça, c'est un peu difficile pour continuer avec vous, mais peut-être, Mr. Ofe, we could follow with. Please, could you describe a little bit to us where you see the big challenges with delivering that diversity of indigenous species and perhaps quality into the Ghanan case?
Thank you. The challenge that we're facing is, well, we have a lot of indigenous tree species, but the quality of the seeds that we get from the natural forest is not so good. So the Forestry Research Institute of Ghana, that the institute that I lead, has some seed orchards where we produce quality seeds. And so the institute collects the seeds, process, and store them. And these are released as and when required. But the quantity that we get is quite small. So we need to do better by establishing more seed orchards. So in one of our projects, we have a target of establishing 600 hectares of seed orchards, both indigenous and exotic. For now, we have been able to establish 150 hectares of seed orchards. So what we do is we also manage some seed stands in the natural forest. So seed stands are a population of elite trees, or we can also we find this good population and then improve on them by removing the undesirable ones and so on. So this is where we also get some seeds from. Unfortunately, these trees are also being illegally removed from the forest. So that is a big challenge, but we're trying and doing our best to collect more and then put them in the seed center and then release them. So the tools that were presented by Biodiversity were very, very interesting to me, that I want to partner with Biodiversity to implement this in the country, because we need to follow up from the source to where they are planted, and then also check whether these give us the desirable products at the end or not. So this is something that I want us to partner with this, so that we'll be able to track our products to the farmers level. So we're doing our best to establish more seed orchards to produce quality materials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'd like to ask you just very brief. Well,
maybe I also want to comment on one issue. Not doing very well is the seed and seedling distribution system, because it's like a little bit of centralized. But this is something that we also need to analyze the whole country and then check on what the local people are doing, the quality of the seedlings that they churn out, and be able to backstop them, train them, establish what ICRAF say This is rural resource centers, so that this is the place that we produce seeds. We train the local people so that they are able to take over the nurseries, operate it as business, be able to produce the good quality materials that will be sold to the programs or projects, so that they will also be able to, get some income, short income for themselves. So this is something that we need to analyze in the country, help farmers or local communities to produce high quality materials that will be used. Because if you don't use quality germplasm, that also has a lot of diversity in it, it will fail. Because it was even mentioned in one of the presentations that if you don't use highly diverse material, it's like doing a monoculture. And we are not able to track what is going on from the communities. So it's something that we could partner with others and work on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask both of you to provide me with a one-word answer to this next question, either a yes or no, if you don't mind. I'd like to ask you, do you believe that supply of seed is going to be one of the most significant factors in your delivering on your bond challenge agreements?
Highly yes.
Chris, tu sais, la semence, j'ai oublié de le dire tout à l'heure, je suis spécialiste en technologie des semences. Dans l'agriculture, une bonne semence, c'est déjà 40% de réussite de la plantation. Et on peut transposer cela dans le domaine forestier. Donc, si on a la maîtrise de la semence, on a la maîtrise de la qualité de la semence, on a également une bonne plantation, on a la réussite de la plantation. Donc, c'est très important dans le cadre du renouvellement des ressources.
Merci beaucoup. Ça, c'est pas une mot, mais pas de problème. Merci. I'd like to open the floor to questions from the audience now. We are probably running out of time, but I'd like to have at least a few. I'd like to start with some of the younger members of the audience first, and ideally female members, so please.
Is centered on the youth. I've been hearing a lot about women incorporated in the program and how it's important that they are involved. But my question is, how are you reaching out as an organization to the youth? I think these are very important, supported generation that hasn't been spoken about, considering we're 80% of Africa's population right now. How are you engaging us? How are you going to it's good that you're analyzing all these things. It's amazing that you have all this data. It's good that governments are implementing these into small communities, but how are you going to engage the biggest part of your population? My second question was, and I promise it was there. Let's just start with that. Oh wait, it's back. So you mentioned something about the modules in your presentation. How do you give those out? For example, I'm a young woman and I want to do this. How do I come up to you and get these? Thank you.
Marlena, would you like to take the first question?
Sure, so thank you for your question. And I think, the idea of social inclusion is not only about women, it's also, of course, about youth. It's about groups that may have fewer resources, be more marginalized on various bases. So, for example, migrants as well, who might have come into areas and don't have secure rights to lands, who might be particularly vulnerable when land gains value with restoration and so on. But so with respect to youth, one thing that Marius mentioned at the beginning is that, for example, looking at strengthening the seed supply system and nurseries and so on, there are new opportunities arising also with restoration that can be proposed or explored with diverse members of the community. So youth might be, and youth of course are very also diversified, so there are young women, there are young men, and they have different aspirations, and so there are different ways that youth can be engaged. One might be through income generation, through nurseries, or through income generation linked to new enterprises that might grow around restored lands and products that are occurring on those lands. But it might also be that youth have other aspirations, like some people might choose to move out of the city, and there might be potentials for reinvestment as well into restoration. So I think there are different ways that youth can catalyze and support and be supported through restoration initiatives. And essentially it's about doing analyses and finding out who, and rather than saying it's only it's this group, but understanding a little bit more the nuances around who can contribute, who's interested, who has, and how they need to be supported to be able to contribute meaningfully in a way that brings them the benefits that they would like to gain from restoration.
Could I comment on that? For the youth? Yes. We've also noticed that the youth need short-term income. Anything the youth do, they want to know, this is how much we're going to take. So it should be planned like business. So, like, why don't you integrate this in the form of agroforestry, where they could get food, fruits, timber, whatever it is, within the landscape, so that they will have short-term income to support themselves. Another way is also example that Ghana government is implementing, youth in afforestation, where the Ghana government has recruited 20,000 youth to support afforestation in nurseries, in the actual tree planting and so on, and paying them something small to keep them going. So they are really, really happy and very supportive in this program. So anything that you do for the youth, I think we need to find a way of motivating them in a little payment, creating markets, and other incentives. So this is how we're trying to address the youth involvement. Thank you.
Okay, so I will address your second question about the forest genetic resource training module. Those modules are already on the website of Biodiversity. So the way it's designed is a very simple module with not too many complicated work to understand, So even if, because all of those forest officers who are in the field, most of them, the level of education is usually only a high school. So we have those modules and it's developed with some PowerPoint presentation and with some module for the teacher, the guy who are teaching those modules. And when we developed those modules, we first wanted to teach them to different groups with some teachers. And then we have somehow validated them. So it's free on the website, self-understanding, you can go through and understand yourself. Or also they can also be taught. So one thing we are doing within the Sub-Saharan African Forest Genetic Resource Network is to find a kind of funding, to organize at least once per year, maybe once, because we are in Sub-Saharan Africa, you have to deal with English and French, almost 20 French-speaking countries. So we can invite, different people from those forest agencies in the countries to teach to them those tools, and then continue. So I think it's probably the right way to go. Because if you look in many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa, forests are really managed by the state. And all of those forest officers, they are civil servants. They are working for the government, so it's highly centralized. And if we can reach those people, I think we will go deeper. I've tried in Benin last year. I invited people from the forestry department. We just showed to them very practical results about the Kaya project I showed. And then they were like, wow. And somebody told me, if I understand correctly, they used to collect seed from this tree from the south in Cotonou and go to plant them in the north, almost 500 kilometers away. Different zone, and all of them are dying, and they don't know why. And she said, oh, maybe this is the reason, because when we go to the forest, our guidelines said you need to collect seed from maybe 10 trees. But when we see one tree with a lot of seed, we just collect and then return home very quickly. And then we plant in the field. We do everything right, but then they die, we have to repeat again. So those are probably ways to reach people, and also try to involve also maybe at high school also. What Daniel just described, I think this is something very good. And the other thing I realized in Cameroon now, one of our sister CG center, they're just starting a program about youth in agriculture, so more focusing on crops, yams, potato, everything. And probably we can use this model also. Thanks.
Thanks, Marius. I'd like to at least get one other question in before we run out of time. So, is there, yes, at the back.
Probably final year students who are yet to take up projects for their final year can reach out to you as well, because this will also help in the distribution of the seedlings as well. And it can, because every year a lot of students graduate, and imagine almost half these students take up this project. It will be a very good initiative. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think I make very clear one of biodiversity's main practices is to work very close with local universities in countries, and so we're very, very open to collaborating with students from those countries and look forward to hearing from you. I think, unless we have any other urgent questions, I'm going to wrap up. And I think we've had a fantastic range of examples and dialogue here about really what the major challenge is in terms of, if we want to plant 1 trillion trees, we have a very significant challenge ahead of us. And it's been fantastic to hear from our 2 country representatives what the significance of that challenge is if we don't just want to rely on 1 or 2 few species, but to be able to deliver diversity at the level that's going to be necessary to deliver on sustainable development goals. And it's going to be fundamental to resilient restoration at the end of the day. Not just genetic diversity, but species diversity that's going to support resilient livelihoods, resilient climate mitigation, resilient water delivery, and resilient biodiversity conservation. So I'd like to actually ask Eric Fernandez, who is the global lead on agricultural practice at the World Bank, to just come and say a last few words at the end of this session, and thank all of my panelists as well for their fantastic contribution.
Jambo jambo, habari zenu. I spoke in Kiswahili because I'm Kenyan. I grew up in northern Kenya. I lived with nomads for the first 10 years of my life. And then my parents caught me and sent me to school. And some of you have heard me say that was the start of my problem. But that was, I appreciate now just how important those first 10 years of my life were, because nomadic people manage landscapes all the time. And when I was young, I didn't have glasses. My vision was 20/20, and every young nomad child that I played with said, and their mothers or fathers would say, there is such and such a tree. And even with those old telescopes, I couldn't see it. But in their mental map, they had it. They knew the species, they knew what it provided, why it was important, why it was in that landscape. So that was something that today I've realized how important it is. So I'm going to scare you a little bit. This conversation should have taken place 3 decades ago. Okay? The train has left the station. If you look at the recent literature on the research on the progress of climate change, it is just unbelievable what's happening. So last week, one of the papers suggested that we have less than 5% chance of keeping a 2-degree centigrade level. How many of us would get in on a train or in a car or a plane that had only a 5% chance of arriving its destination? So that's the reality. So we need to really disrupt all our thinking. Everybody hears about disruptive technologies, and I'll go on to say that I happened to somehow find a path to leave northern Kenya, do my forestry training in Aberdeen with some very good Ghanaian colleagues. Yeah. Then went to the US, where I trained with Jean Namkung and Bruce Zobel, premier forest geneticists. So I was schooled in forest genetics in the true sense of the word. And then they sent me to the Amazon. So I went from 200 millimeters of rainfall in northern Kenya to 3,000 millimeters rainfall in the Amazon, where if you stand long enough, your shoes start to grow roots. I mean, you know, fungus. But there I was exposed to Native Americans, indigenous communities, that manage their landscapes on a threshold of 300 to 500 years. So they are thinking long-lived species. Brazil nut lives over 1,000 years. Some of the other three. So this sort of landscape is both spatial and temporal. That's something I learned. And the diversity of their food is just unbelievable. So thousands of edible plants. How many food species does humanity rely on today? 3 grasses, 2 roots. It's ridiculous. Okay? So how are we talking resilience if we're not? So that's a long, so disrupt seed supply. Throw out all your ideas of, now this is going to sound like heresy, but you know I've trained in that, so I'm saying, I'm being provocative. Your seed orchard concepts, your seed selection concepts, etc. Disrupt it, put this idea with primary school children as to why this is important. Let them understand, if you go to a school compound, it's concrete or bare soil. Why? Why isn't it a vibrant garden with tree species? Should be. That's how they would learn from a very young age. Once children pick up that concept, then you have a better way of actually moving it back. So they take it home. Every home starts to have a multi-species home garden. That's one of my first publications when I came back from university was the Chaga home gardens on Kilimanjaro. We documented upwards of 400 species in small plots. Valuable timber trees, edible fruits, medicinal plants, you name it, it was there. Then southeastern Nigeria, same, 400 plus species. You can go back and look at it. These are called the tropical home gardens. They're just marvelous arcs of species. And if we don't disrupt that, climate change is going to take care of a lot of the species that we're hoping to save. And you've heard recently that the very old baobabs are dying. They're dying, all of a sudden. The same sort of thing is happening in Latin America. Same sort of thing is happening. So, urgency. I don't have time, but so disrupt, and there are 3 Ds, okay? Disrupt, because disruptive climate change is really doing a number on us, whatever. The big migration push you're seeing now is only the tip of the iceberg, okay? So, many regions are busy building economic and rail walls for a good reason, because they see what's coming. Now, is it good or bad? I don't know, but I'm saying, from their perspective, it's a good reason. Diversify, be inclusive of all your youth, children, teenagers, everybody. Women, obvious, I won't repeat it. And sites. Svalbard, that big seed repository, was almost lost recently because the ice melted and almost flooded it. So you don't want, okay, get away from this sort of big Fort Knox type approaches. Disaggregate, distribute, move it everywhere in the landscape. Put it in schools. You've got living repositories, and you can have some that are also in seed orchards, etc. The 3rd D is really, you know, actually part of that diversify is nutrients. It was raised here. 2 weeks ago, a very important paper came out. As carbon dioxide levels increase in the atmosphere, nutritional contents of our premier cereal grains and food species are going down. The projection is for India, they're going to have upwards of 100 million people malnourished because of their foods not containing the basic nutrients they have, simply because of climate change. So let's see how we can include a lot of these species. Okay, and so I'll stop there. But because this is such a big challenge, it's also a huge opportunity. Now, why is the Green Climate Fund? Now, I don't want anybody to attribute this to the World Bank. This is my own opinion. Caveat. As tomorrow I'll have to answer to some very angry people. Why is the Green Climate Fund funding 100 million here, 50 million here? It should be $1 billion+ program that it funds on saving tree germplasm across continents. I mean, $1 billion is just a touch. I mean, Every continent should get 1 billion at least, if not 2 or 3. Because it's late, we've lost a lot, and we haven't begun to sort of estimate what else is coming down the pipe. Now, one word wasn't mentioned. You know, what happens when a seed, you have a seed, you have all the seeds in the world. What is the next thing you do with that seed? This is a really important question. And again, it's something I learned from my indigenous and nomadic colleagues. What is the first thing you do with the seed? Yeah, you put it in the soil, right? The seed germinates, and what's the first thing that happens? The root that goes down to the soil hits the soil. What is soil? It's mineral, silt, sand, clay. What else? Water. What else? Yeah? What else? The most important living thing of soil. Microbes. Microbiome. The big companies nowadays are looking at microbiome of the human gut, because apparently that makes a lot of difference to disease. The soil microbiome and seeds they are partners that if you just have the seed, it's like coming to this conference in your underwear, you know, and then deciding where am I going to find all the clothes. If you don't find the partners that you need in your new place where you're planted, the success rate of those seeds germinating and growing into a viable tree is very, very low. And we've tried this in various continents where I've worked. I've had the pleasure and privilege of doing it. What we did was we had collected good seeds and then picked up the topsoil, just the top 3 layers of that soil under a tree which is growing well. Could be a little forest, could be an individual tree, it looks healthy. You bring that topsoil, you make a soup of it, and you put it in the seed beds. What that means is that that microbiome from a healthy tree of that particular species is now in the seed bed. So you've conserved not just the seed, you've conserved the soil microbiome. And I can go into very technical details of why that is. It improves water holding capacity, it improves phosphorus uptake, it sort of, it makes the legumes fix more nitrogen so you don't have to crash the planetary boundary. And so keep that in mind. Start conserving the soil microbiome, because the private company is already doing that. So before you know it, that's going to be the next set of patents that's going to come out. So and when I was trained in this, I'll stop here because I can go on all night. We were sterilizing nursery soil using methyl bromide, one of the most toxic things, so you'd put it under a piece of cover, you'd have your soil, you'd put a little case there with a nail in it, you'd put the methyl bromide can, you'd hit it and you'd run, because it was extremely toxic. And you'd come back and everything in the soil was dead. And then you'd fill your little bags and plant your seedlings, and they'd look the most horrible seedlings you've ever seen. No. Okay? So there's a lot to do. Do it now. Start as soon as you can and get the youth, women, everybody involved. Get the grandparents, because they have the repository of knowledge. Okay? And so everybody needs to. Thank you. Sorry if I've gone too long.
Thank you very much, Eric. I think that was a wonderful closing to the session, really emphasizing that this is an urgent matter. And I'd like to end by saying this is really a call. The Biodiversity Initiative, Trees for Seeds, is a call to collaborate. This is part of this CGIAR Forest, Trees and Agroforestry program, which is with our partners CFOR and ICRAF. But we're opening our doors to everyone. We really want to work together on this. It's going to take everyone to interact to achieve resilient restoration and bring in the diversity that is so fundamental to our survival. So thank you everyone for your contribution, and have a great evening.